Okay, so today we are going to completely shatter how you view your body's response to danger, trauma, and stress. Seriously, it's a total paradigm shift. We usually think of the skeleton as just, a structural frame, basically an assembly of calcified tubes that just keeps us upright. But what if I told you that your bones are actually a highly sensitive endocrine organ? And not just that, but they're secretly acting as the absolute ultimate driver of your survival instincts.
Let's jump right in. Ask yourself this: what actually triggers your fight or flight response? Just take a second and mentally answer it. I bet if you're like almost everyone else, the word that immediately popped into your head was adrenaline, or, maybe cortisol, right? That is the classic textbook answer we've relied on for decades. But get ready, because we are about to bust this deeply entrenched biological myth wide open.
Here's where it gets interesting. Geneticist Gerard Carcenti at Columbia University noticed a massive medical mystery with our traditional understanding of stress. So under the old model, the endocrine system releases glucocorticoids, like cortisol, to manage that whole cascade of fight-or-flight chemicals. But there's a glaring time problem here. Cortisol's main job is to trigger cells into transcribing specific genes. And that biological process, it takes hours. It operates at a snail's pace. If you're facing an immediate life-or-death physiological threat, a hormone that takes hours to kick in is just way too slow to rocket you out of harm's way. There absolutely had to be a faster messenger.
And here is the bizarre plot twist. The true star player of your acute stress response isn't actually your adrenal glands. Nope, it's your skeleton. To protect you from immediate danger, your bones literally flood your bloodstream with a hormone called osteocalcin. Now, historically, we knew osteocalcin was involved in bone development and, maybe regulating glucose in memory, but Carcenti's lab discovered that it's actually the rapid-fire chemical that kicks off your entire fight or flight response.
Now, this whole process relies on the incredibly complex, microscopic world of peptide signaling. When we look at intricate molecular chaperone structures, like the ones we see with peptide hormones, we're really seeing the precise mechanisms that allow a bone-derived hormone to rapidly alter the physiology of your organs. It completely bypasses that much slower gene transcription process. It's like an express lane. And this is exactly how osteocalcin communicates danger across your entire body in an instant.
To really test this out, researchers put lab mice under duress, and wow, the data is just staggering. Just 15 minutes, only 15 minutes, after researchers delivered a few harmless but definitely uncomfortable shocks to the mice's feet, the osteocalcin levels in their peripheral blood jumped by a massive 150%. The skeleton was just dumping this hormone into the bloodstream almost immediately.
Actually, it gets even faster. When mice were given a whiff of a chemical found in fox urine, which, aside from being pretty gross, represents a massive direct predator threat to a mouse, their osteocalcin levels spiked in just 2.5 minutes. That spike happened way before any traditional corticosterone levels even began to climb, and it stayed high for 3 hours. So this definitively proves that osteocalcin acts far faster than the stress hormones we usually talk about. So how exactly does this biological relay race work? Well, it starts when the fear centers of your brain, like the amygdala, detect a threat. Those neurons instantly fire glutamate directly to the osteoblasts, which are your bone-forming cells. Then, a transporter called GLAST lets the glutamate inside, and that blocks a specific enzyme, triggering a massive release of active osteocalcin straight into your blood. Brain to bone to blood. And it all happens in just seconds.
This brilliantly illustrates why osteocalcin is the true driver here. Researchers looked at rodents and even observed humans who were lacking adrenal glands, meaning they literally had no way of producing adrenaline or cortisol. Yet they could still mount an entirely intact fight or flight response. Isn't that wild? It proves that circulating osteocalcin all by itself is enough to drive your acute stress reaction, completely independent of your adrenal glands.
Let's look at how this plugs into our overall nervous system. Once that osteocalcin hits your bloodstream, it binds to specific receptors called GPRC6A. These receptors are hanging out on your parasympathetic neurons, and by binding there, osteocalcin literally flips a switch and turns off your calming rest and digest system. With the brakes completely taken off, your sympathetic nervous system just runs wild, instantly cranking up your heart rate, spiking your body temperature, and flooding your muscles with glucose. Your skeleton is essentially acting as a sensory survival organ.
But we have to ask, what happens when this intense, bone-driven survival circuit gets overwhelmed? Well, when the nervous system cannot resolve a physical or emotional threat, it organizes into states of profound shock. And in this explainer, we can categorize this kind of human trauma into 4 distinct architectures: impact, implosive, vestibular, and horror shock.
Let's take impact shock first. This is triggered by a sudden, unexpected threat. It could be a physical assault, a car accident, or honestly, even a sudden emotional abandonment. Biologically, this activates the superior colliculus in your brain, so you rapidly orient toward the danger, all while the locus coeruleus pumps out noradrenaline. When this goes unresolved, the body just remains trapped. It gets stuck in a perpetual loop of hypervigilance, panic, and chronic scanning for danger.
Then there is implosive shock. Now, this one doesn't come from a sudden explosion of threat, but rather a cumulative collapse. It's usually born out of chronic neglect, attachment deprivation, or a prolonged lack of relational attunement, especially back in childhood. Internally, individuals experience this as a profound internal coldness, maybe pressure behind the eyes, emotional deadness, and just an overwhelming sense of loneliness. The nervous system simply shuts down.
Or consider vestibular shock. This happens when there is a sudden disruption of orientation, gravity, or spatial certainty. Think about things like severe falls, whiplash, near drowning, or really disorienting medical procedures. The vestibular system's connection to the brain literally gets severed, and that produces terrifying somatic symptoms like vertigo, floating sensations, disembodiment, and this constant internal sensation that you're falling or drifting.
And finally, we have horror shock. This occurs when terror intersects with profound disgust. It's triggered by witnessing grotesque violence, severe abuse, or overwhelming human suffering. This specific type of shock heavily activates the brain's insula. The autonomic nervous system responds with intense somatic revulsion, nausea, gag reflexes, intrusive imagery, moral injury, and essentially a complete psychophysiological shutdown to protect the organism from what is truly unbearable.
Now, it is absolutely vital to understand that in any of these states of shock, your nervous system does not care about logic. It doesn't pause to ask, hey, is this rational? Not at all. It operates entirely beneath the cortex, asking only ancient, primitive questions. Am I safe? Am I alone? Can I orient? Can I survive? It is a purely biological calculation.
So the absolutely crucial point is this. When these defensive activations, which remember are fueled by rapid-fire hormones like osteocalcin, are not completed, they become frozen in our procedural memory. This turns into somatic, symptom-forming shock. The unresolved trauma manifests physically. We're talking chronic pain, functional neurological symptoms, gastrointestinal dysregulation, and constant muscular bracing. The physical body literally becomes the language of the uncompleted trauma.
Because trauma and shock are so deeply biological, happening right at the level of our bones and our brain stems, healing cannot simply be forced or logically reasoned with. You can't just think your way out of it. Healing requires establishing genuine physiological safety. It requires relational attunement, allowing the body to naturally orient itself in space and actually completing that interrupted fight, flight, or freeze cascade. Ultimately, it's about integration, never suppression. I really want to leave you with this incredibly powerful framing from the clinical literature. Shock is not weakness. Shock is adaptive survival physiology. If you have experienced trauma, your body was prioritizing your survival over your coherence. It was using incredibly fast, ancient mechanisms like bone hormones to keep you alive in an unbearable moment. It did exactly what it was supposed to do.
So we end this explainer with a provocative thought. We now know for sure that your skeleton is a sensory organ. It's constantly listening for danger, ready to flood your body with osteocalcin at a moment's notice. Knowing that, what signals are you sending to your bones today to tell them that you are finally safe?